It's very difficult to find an upside on voting to leave. We firmly think that remaining in the EU is the best option for Britain. Mike Jakeman, EIU. Firstly then, Mike, US labour data released this week points decidedly to sustained strength in the jobs market, despite a sharp slowdown in hiring last month. Do you think then that the harsh criticism of the May jobs report may have been misplaced?
Yeah, I think I'm relatively upbeat on the state of the US economy, and I don't think that the May jobs report was necessarily as consequential and as negative as has been suggested. Of course, at the moment we need about 100,000 net new jobs a month to maintain levels of US employment, so the fact that there were 38,000 is a bad figure. But I think this has to be looked at in the context of where we are in the economic cycle. The US labour market has created thousands upon thousands of new jobs now for over 3 years. And understandably, we've seen a lot of the slack in the labour market start to get used up. And of course, the unemployment rate's fallen in half now from almost 10% immediately after the global financial crisis, now down to 4.7%. So I think it's reasonable that, when you see how far along the cycle we are, that we're going to see a few wobbly months in terms of job creation. Now, the worry would be if these jobs were disappearing, or rather not being created at the same time as wages were failing to rise. But we're not seeing that either. We're seeing that, we're moving along this cycle where we're now going to find fewer jobs created, but also higher wages for workers who are moving jobs. So actually, I'm not too concerned about this. Obviously, if we had a series of months where we had fewer jobs being created than were necessary to support the labour market in its current phase, that would be a problem. But I don't think we're going to see that. I think this is a one-off.
Okay, well, further to this, the Federal Reserve had initially hinted at a June or July interest rate rise, though the weak May jobs data has seemingly all but ruled out a June rate hike. When are you expecting the Fed to act, if at all?
We've long been forecasting 2 Fed rate rises this year. Of course, the Fed has said, Yellen has said over and over again that it depends on what the data tells us. So if we decided, assuming that we get a vote to remain in, and we can talk about that in a minute, and there are no further bad data releases, I think it's a fair bet to say that the Fed will probably move again in July, and perhaps then we'll get the 3rd rate rise in the current cycle in December. The risks to this are, of course, on the downside, but I think all things considered, the US economy isn't in bad shape. I think the Fed has a mild preference for raising. That's partly to cover its own back, because of course if the economy was to have another downturn, the Fed doesn't have the option now of cutting rates as enthusiastically as it did in 2009. So I think there is a slight preference for raising, if at all possible. But we've yet to actually have Yellen tell us that. She's been very non-committal about this, which is her prerogative. But I'm still forecasting an increase in July and probably another one in December as well.
And Asian shares pulled back on Friday amid concerns over the looming EU referendum on June 23rd. There seems to be rising market concerns as the polls indicate that a Brexit vote is increasingly likely. What is your economic assessment of this rather unique situation?
Well, our forecast is that we're going to get a vote to remain in, which is a happy forecast to make, because we certainly believe that will be better for the British economy if it did. It's certainly reasonable to suggest that it's on a knife edge at the moment, although some of the polling, some of the internet polling in particular, I think is probably less reliable. I think on balance, a forecast for remain is reasonable. If we were to get a leave vote, the calculations that we've done and that we're sort of hanging on this is that we think GDP would be 6% smaller by 2020 relative to the size it would be if we voted to stay in. So that's a fairly clear assessment that we think that leaving would be economically damaging for the UK. It's very difficult for us to find an upside to voting for leave. We firmly think that remaining in is the best option for Britain, and we certainly hope that the voters agree when they go to the polls in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you, Mike. Be sure to check back on Monday for the week ahead with Celeste Skinner. We'll see you then.